Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ben Keyser with Applied Flow Technology. Hope that you all are having an excellent week so far, and I want to thank you for joining me in my webinar this morning. Today, I'm going to talk about how you can do full system cost calculations with AFT Fathom and AFT Arrow, and I'm going to talk about some very exciting things that we have going on here really soon. But before we jump into that, this webinar is being recorded. If you are listening in live, I have provided a PDF of my presentation for you. That way you can have the slides for later. You'll be sent a link to the recording sometime later this week. That way you can watch it again at your own time, or you can send it around to your colleagues. And then if you're listening to the recorded version, then if you email me at benkeyser@aft.com, I'll be happy to send you a copy of my presentation as well. That's BENKEISER@aft.com. All right, so go ahead and we'll jump into this here. A couple things worth noting is our primary AFT products, which you can find more information about on our website. I'm not going to go into the details behind what each of our software products do, but if you go to aft.com, under the products menu, you can go to our software overview, and this will give you a very basic high-level overview for all the different products that we offer. And then you can dive in and find more details about each of them individually if you like. All right, some helpful prerequisites to today's webinar, which I'm sure you didn't get a chance to listen in on first. They'll benefit you greatly is a few webinars and tips and tricks articles that I've done recently. So early on this year here in 2019, I did a webinar right here, the top 10 AFT features you can't go without. That's an excellent webinar that talks about things like Scenario Manager, global editing, importing and exporting from Excel, different things like that. And so some of the content in that webinar would maybe tie in a little bit to today's webinar. Nevertheless, it's definitely an important webinar for you to watch at your own time if you haven't had a chance to attend it already. Secondly, last week I did a webinar on database management and customization. That's a really important webinar for today because in that webinar I talked all about databases, how to create custom databases, how to share databases. That way they can be sent around to your colleagues. And that webinar, I go through and discuss how to create the different types of databases. And it's really important to understand how to use databases in our software because they are used very extensively in doing cost calculations. So if you want to do cost calculations, then having a good understanding of how the databases work and the structure is key. And also it'll help you be even more efficient anyway. And so there's a lot of custom information that you might be working with that may not be in the software, and you can very easily create your own custom information. So it's really good information to know. These are a 4-part blog article series that I wrote a couple years ago, all on databases. So if you watch the webinar, that'll give you a good high-level overview, but the blog articles here talk about the details behind databases in a lot more depth. So be sure to peruse through those pieces of content. We have a couple of really important upcoming webinars that we'll be doing in the next few weeks. Very soon, AFT is going to be launching a brand new add-on module for AFT Fathom and AFT Arrow. It's going to be called the Automated Network Sizing Module, ANS for short. And what that module is going to do is it will automatically size pipes in your system in order to minimize, it'll automatically size your pipes in order to easily meet your design requirements. That's probably one of the most useful things. So rather than having to constantly change pipe size manually and run the result or run the model to get results and then go back and tweak it, ANS will do this for you automatically. So it'll automatically meet all your design requirements, and then it'll also minimize your life cycle costs or your piping weight, and that can help you save millions of dollars on your project. So be sure to register for those upcoming webinars that we're going to be doing to introduce that new module. So on Friday, March 22nd, we're going to do a webinar, How to Automate Your Pipe Sizing Calculations. That's going to go over the fundamental and the basics of what the capability is. And then on Wednesday, April 3rd, How to Automatically Size Your Network with ANS. We'll talk about a more complicated piping network to really highlight the powerful capability of ANS. And ANS is not new. It's actually taking the features and capabilities that have been in AFT Mercury and AFT Titan for almost 20 years. And rather than having them be a separate software that you need to learn, we're just going to take those capabilities and expand on them and integrate them directly into Fathom and Arrow with what you're already familiar with. And it's going to be so much easier for you to be able to use, a lot more streamlined. So we're really excited about that. And that's why today's webinar is really important, because with the automated network sizing module, it's important to know how to incorporate costs and cost database and doing cost calculations with the software. And so today's webinar will lead in to those upcoming ones really nicely. All right, if you were to open up the AFT Fathom examples help file, which is located on the folder of where your application is installed on your computer, there's an examples folder where you can open up the help file, and there are a couple of excellent cost calculation walkthrough tutorials. And so I've highlighted those right here. The beginner cost calculation example, that's a bit more simplified to where it has you start with an existing system, and then you simply connect cost databases that have already been created for you. So it doesn't teach you how to create them from scratch. It's more to introduce you to what types of costs that Fathom can calculate and how to do those analyses. The plant cost cooling example right here is the one that talks about how to build a cost database from scratch. And that's actually what I'm going to go through today, is the plant cooling cost calculation example. And so if you want to be able to repeat the efforts that I did today, you'll have my slides as a good reference point. You can watch the webinar, but ultimately, if you want a really good step-by-step process of how to do this type of calculation and build those examples, is to be sure to work through this example on your own, and that will lead you through the process of how to do that. All right. So calculating costs can be done with AFT Fathom and AFT Arrow. Obviously, I'm going to be demonstrating this capability with AFT Fathom today, but the process in AFT Arrow is exactly the same. So nothing's different. So if you have AFT Arrow, you can do the same thing that I'm doing here with Fathom today. So you can easily report the following types of costs: material costs, installation costs, those would be your non-recurring, and then you can also do maintenance costs as well as energy costs. And you can apply these types of costs to just about anything in your model, the junctions, pipes, as well as the fittings and losses. So if you have T's in your model or dead ends, you can also include those in your physical graphical model, and we can account for those costs as well. And when you do your cost calculations, you're going to be using engineering databases a lot as well as cost databases. And again, if you watched the previous webinar that I did on database management, that was all about engineering databases. And then a cost database would be associated with a particular engineering database. You're going to see exactly what that looks like here in today's webinar. You can also have multiple cost databases for a single engineering database, different vendor costs, different currencies, etc. So here's how databases are related to each other in the software. I have my overall Fathom model, and then in the database manager, which you'll see today, you can have multiple engineering databases and cost calculation databases. So there are several engineering databases that are already built into AFT Fathom. There's the AFT default internal database that contains all of your loss factors. It contains fluid properties, insulation data sets, even things that you wouldn't actually calculate costs for. That's where we've included all of our fluid information, the AFT standard fluids. That AFT default internal database is an engineering database. The AFT local user database is an engineering database. So anything that you create that's custom on your computer, whether it's custom pipe materials, custom fluids, custom components, custom fittings, all of that information is going to be stored in your local user database on your computer until you share it with somebody else. That local user engineering database is an engineering database. And then finally, we have all of our pipe materials that we have included for you. Those are engineering databases. So in my plant cooling model today, I'm actually going to have 3 engineering databases. I'm going to have the steel ANSI pipe material database that's built into AFT Fathom. I'm going to use the default AFT internal database for the fittings and losses on my pipes. And then there's a external engineering database, which is a custom database for my pumps. And then I have my material and installation costs available for all of those. So again, the reason why you can have multiple cost databases for a single engineering database is if you have steel piping, you can have different cost databases that you would use, which could be different vendor costs or different regions, different currencies. And so all of those can be associated to one single engineering database. Today, I'm only dealing with one cost database per engineering database. All right, so the way that you would enable your cost calculations is really easy. You just go to the analysis menu in AFT Fathom, and then under cost calculations, you would choose to do either pump energy only or calculate. Pump energy is just a quick and dirty method of being able to quickly calculate what your energy costs are. So if you have multiple pumps in a model and you just want to know how much it's going to cost to run your pumps, then that's where you could just keep it simple and do energy costs. The second option is obviously more advanced, and that's where you can calculate all of your system costs. So if you click on calculate, you could do material, installation, maintenance, and energy. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do material, installation, and energy costs. We're not going to do any maintenance costs in today's example. A quick aside is we don't have labor costs listed here. So what you might do if you want to account for labor costs is perhaps include that as more of a maintenance cost item. And that's how you could probably account for labor costs if you want. But this is just really giving you a good idea of how much the system will cost by itself, not the people required to build it. All right. After you go in and determine which types of costs you're going to calculate, you then have access to the cost settings window. This is where you define your energy cost information and which types of costs you're going to calculate. You can enter a system life, years, months, days. You can do interest and inflationary rates, a lot of flexibility there. And we're going to see that here really quick with our model. So this is the plant cooling system that I'm going to calculate the costs for you. So in this particular model here, I have a cooling water system where I've got cooling tower basins right here, and then those basins, we've got 4 pumps here in parallel, and those are going to circulate water through the system out each of these individual spray nozzles. And so that's my system here. Wherever you see these little ampersands, that's a new feature that we came out with in AFT Fathom 10 and AFT Aero 7. And what that little red ampersand means is inside those pipes, if you were to open up the pipe property window, we've included fittings and losses. So that's a good visual indicator on which pipes we've included fittings and losses for. So you can account for costs in those fashions as well. So when you're building your model of your system and you want to do your cost calculations, you don't have to use a whole bunch of junctions like elbows and area changes just to account for their costs. You can include them in the pipe itself, and then that's how you'd be able to keep your model simplified and still know how much everything's going to cost. All right, so what I'm going to be calculating today is several different types of costs in this model. So this is the plant cooling cost calculation example. We want to determine what the material, installation, and energy costs will be over a 10-year period. And so there are several databases that are going to be used in this example. There are 3 engineering databases for this system, which are already pre-built. The first one is the Steel ANSI Pipe Material Database. That's what we have included with the standard software so you can use steel piping. That's the engineering database that we're going to use for the pipes. Second is we have the AFT Default Internal Database. Again, this is a database that contains all of our handbook loss factors and loss models, the AFT standard fluid information, etc. So the AFT Default Internal Database is going to be our engineering database for the fittings and losses. So if you want to calculate the costs for the fittings in these particular pipes here, we're going to associate that cost database that we'll create from scratch with the AFT internal standard database. All right. And then last but not least, we have a extra database that is created for this example. So if you are working through the walkthrough tutorial, it will show you how to connect the plantcooling.dat database. That's a database that contains essentially just the pump curve information. So when we connect that database for the pumps, we can do the calculations for the pumps as well. So the plantcooling.dat file, that's our engineering database file for pumps. And then the cost databases that we need to build from scratch for this system are going to be the material and installation costs for the pipes, material and installation costs for the fittings that are lumped into the pipes, and then finally the material and installation costs for the pumps. I have all my cost information here in a spreadsheet. So these are my costs for Schedule 20 steel piping, and I have ranging diameters from 8 inches up to 30 inches, and then I have material and installation costs in terms of dollar per foot. And then I have material and installation costs for the 90-degree elbows that I've lumped into the pipes. So we're going to do the elbow cost in a little bit different of a fashion. We're going to use what we call cost scale tables. And the cost scale tables makes it easier to create your elbow costs just based upon how the pipe size scales itself. So here's all of our cost information that we're going to use there. And then last but not least, we have our pump cost information for the material and installation. So the cost of the pumps is just under $29,000. Installation costs under $13,000. Keep in mind, all of these costs were built for the plant cooling cost calculation example, which was probably developed 10 to 15 years ago. So these costs are very, very old. And nowadays, if you were trying to do the same cost, the cost values would probably be a lot more. So just go with it. A little aside is if you wanted to start with these costs and then you know how much these costs have scaled up over time, you can use cost multipliers. I'm not going to talk about that today. You can read about what cost multipliers are in our help file. But if this is all the information you have and you have an idea of how much those costs have increased over the years, the cost multipliers can help you start with these costs and then it'll automatically multiply them for your actual cost calculations for what it would be today. All right, so this is probably the last slide that I'll be showing before I jump into the model here. So yes, it is. So let me go ahead and jump into AFT Fathom now. So I'm going to move my PowerPoint over to the side here, and here's my Fathom model. So this is the Fathom model that I really stripped everything down. Excuse me. I stripped out all of the database, like the plant cooling database for the pumps, etc. So as you can see, each of these pipes here have the ampersand sign. That means that the little and sign there tells that they have fittings and losses. So if I open up one of these pipes here, you'll see on the fittings and losses tab, with this pipe, it's 40 feet long. In this particular pipe, I have one elbow. So it's a smooth flanged elbow with an R over D of 90 degrees. If you click on this specify fittings and losses tab, or button rather, this is where you can specify a number of different types of fittings. So you can do elbows, valves, check valves, orifice plates, etc. So any of these fittings that you're lumping in with the pipe fittings and losses tab, we can account for those costs when they are lumped into this list right in here. So if I close out of this window here and I go to the model data tab, you can see on the fittings and losses tab here that there are several pipes which contains additional fittings. So some pipes have 3 elbows, some only have 2, some only have 1. You can see what the total K factor is for that, and we're going to account for all of those costs as well. Just for keeping these calculations simple, we only have elbows, but we could throw in other fittings as well if we want to. In addition to the pipe fittings and losses, if you go to the pipes tab here, this contains the input information for all of your pipes throughout the model. So I've given custom names to all the pipes here, and if we scroll over to the right, they're all based upon the steel ANSI material. So if I open up one of these pipes here, in each of the pipes, I've chosen steel ANSI from the drop-down menu, and I'm using Schedule 20 as the type. So there's Schedule 20 for all the pipes. Note that that is different than using standard Schedule 20. So one little aside is that if you're doing these cost calculations and you use standard Schedule 20, but when you build your cost database for the piping using regular Schedule 20, you wouldn't see the cost. So you got to make sure that when you're defining the cost, that it matches what you've defined here in this drop-down menu, which in my case is going to be Schedule 20 here. Now, the reason why you're not seeing a whole list of other pipe materials right here in this drop-down is because I've hidden those items, and I'm going to show you how you can do that. So here's all my piping information, and you can see how my sizes range from 8 inches in diameter up to 30 inches in diameter. So now back to the workspace here. If I go into the database menu, the database manager tells you which databases are available and which ones are connected. And so the available databases are databases that are available for you, but the connected ones are the ones that you're actually going to be using in this particular model. If you read the blog articles that I wrote on databases, then you'll understand better what the differences are between available and connected. Basically, if you want to use a database at all in your model, you just have to make sure that it's actually connected. And by default, when you add a database, that will usually automatically connect it for you. So here, as you can see, if I click on this drop-down menu for available databases, there's all of these databases that are for the pipe material databases that we have included for you in the software. So the internal default database, if I select that and review the content, then you can see here that we've got all of these fluids that we've built in for you. So these are the AFT standard fluids. We have various insulation data sets, and we've got fittings and losses. So these are the default internal database contains all of this information for you. The local user database contains anything custom that you create. So if I created a custom pipe material or a custom component or a custom fluid, that would be saved in my local user database in this file right here. And as you can see, I don't have any custom information that I've made on my computer, so that's why I don't have any items in this list here. And then finally, these are the pipe material databases that we've made available to you. Really quick, if I open up a file explorer on my computer and I browse to where AFT Fathom is installed, if you go to pipe material databases, this is where you can find all of those pipe material databases that we have built for you right here. As you can see, in Fathom 10, we have some new ones. There's steel pipe material databases based upon DIN and EN standards. So you can access that information if you want. Now, because this is a long list of 21 pipe material database items, I don't want to have to go through and scroll through in the pipe property windows all of these data sets all the time. So all of these database files are available, but for the connected databases, I'm only showing steel ANSI. So this is why if I open up any of these, well, I circled the wrong thing. If I open up a property window for a pipe and click on the pipe material drop-down menu, you would only see steel there. The reason why is because I wanted to simplify things for myself. I clicked on set pipe materials. I unchecked all the boxes and only checked the box for steel ANSI. This is the only one that I care about in this model. So that's why that's the only one that's used. So as you can see, these are the databases that I'll be working with. The steel ANSI database here is the engineering database that will be used for the pipe material and installation costs. The default internal database is going to be used for the material and installation costs of the pipe fittings for the ones that have the little ampersand on them. And then finally, there's a external database file that we will add in a little bit later for the pumps. So the way that I'll access that database is by clicking on Edit Available List, and then I'll add an engineering database. And then once I find the database I need, which is this guy, I can open it and it will connect it and make it ready for me. I'm not going to do that yet. I'll do that here in the next few minutes. So this is my starting point. All right. So here's how you start with doing the cost calculation. So I'm going to go to Analysis and then Cost Calculation, and I'll click on Calculate. So that activates cost calculation abilities for me. Now, one quick thing is if I go to the red status light right here, when you turn on one of the cost calculation options here, either pump energy or calculate, there's a new checklist item that becomes available, specify cost settings. So if you want to do cost calculations, you have to define that information. If I tried to run my model, it wouldn't let me because I'm missing some information. It would say, define your cost settings. So I can access the cost settings window just by clicking on it here, or I can access the cost setting windows by clicking here, or I can go there by hitting the analysis menu and then cost settings. So in this model here, you could use a energy cost database if you want, but in my case, I'm just going to use a constant energy cost, which is going to be 10 cents per kilowatt hour, keeping it simple. And I'm going to do material, installation, operation, and energy costs. I'm going to do a system life of 10 years. Now, you have a lot of flexibility with doing different unit sets for costs. So one example is if you were to open up the, let me show you a quick example here. If you open up the Fathom Examples help file and you go to Fathom Modules and then Combine Module, this is a really interesting example because this simple system uses the goal seeking control module, the extended time simulation module, and cost calculations at the same time. So on my assigned flow junction here, I have a flow rate that is changing throughout a 24-hour period. So that's my changing flow demand. And then GSC allows me to model, or I want to do a finite tank right here. And so GSC I'm using to change the pump speed at each time step to maintain a constant liquid height. And I want to calculate the cost of my pump energy. So the key thing is the transient data with XTS that I use to apply for my changing flow demand here is over a 24-hour period. But I want to know how long it is going to, or how much it's going to cost to run my pump in the same fashion over the 24-hour period for a year. So this is where you can do an XTS, a transient simulation for a single day. And then if you want to do the cost calculations, that's where you can use different time units to decouple your system life for the cost calculations and your XTS time period. If you went through and read that example, it would illustrate what I'm talking about. Just a little aside though here. All right, so I have this all set up. The blue highlighting indicates required input. So I've got all that information there. I'll click OK. Now I have specified my cost settings. I could run my model and get results, but now I need to actually define the cost information. So this is where you start building your cost databases from scratch. And once you go through the process of doing it, it's really easy. It may look a little bit daunting, but after you see how I do it here, it'll be a piece of cake for you. So the first thing I'm going to do, if I go back to just show you the reference of where I'm at in my webinar, is I'm going to develop the cost databases for my pipe materials. So here's how we do this. Now that I have my cost settings defined, I can go to my database menu, and now we have the cost database, which is available. Give me one second. Okay, excuse me. So if I go to database and then cost database, this is the window that I will use to build all of my cost information. So I'm going to go through and build separate databases for materials, fittings, and then the pumps. So what I'll do first is simply click on New, and I'm going to create a new cost database for the pipe materials. So here's how we do this. I'll click on New, and then this is where you'd specify which engineering database you're going to use for your cost information. So because I'm creating a cost database for my pipes for material and installation, I'm going to choose Steel ANSI because that's the pipe information I'm using in the model. So I'll select Steel ANSI. If you have a custom pipe material that we have not provided in our software, you could easily create your own custom pipe material database, and then it would appear in this list that you can use to do your costs for it. And again, if you read my blogs, you'll see how you can do that. So here, I'm going to click on Steel ANSI, and I'll click on Select. And then this gives you some basic information. We have to, once we click on Save, we need to create a cost database file name. So I'm going to do that first. So I will click on Save. Well, first it's going to make you give it a description. So you can change your cost type or your units. In this case, I'm going to call this pipe material and installation costs. This is for Steel ANSI piping. So you can do whatever kind of notes that you want. This is where you can do your multiplier. So if you had this cost data that I was talking about, where this cost information is from 10 or 15 years ago, and you know how that cost has increased over time, then this is where you can set multipliers to start with. You would define your reference from your spreadsheet, and then you would multiply it by your factors there. I'm not going to do that in this model. So now that I specify my description and some notes, I'm going to click on Save, and now we'll give it a name. So this will be pipe material and installation costs. So when I save this database, it says, do you want to make this cost database available and connected, which you could do later in the database manager? I'm going to say yes. So now this gives me more information. It's got my database file name, the engineering database that's connected to, which is the Steel ANSI database, and now I'm going to define the cost information. So if I go to define cost information, you would click on pipe materials, and then the old-fashioned way is what you would do is you would click on the pipe material that you want to define cost for. Then you have to find the appropriate size as well as the schedule. So if I want to do costs for 8-inch schedule 20, I would select that schedule first and then click on new cost, and you can give it a description like 8-inch material cost, and then you'd pick a type. So this is going to be my material cost, and then dollars per foot. This is where you would get it from your spreadsheet. That's $10.50 per foot, 10.5. You could do cost per mass as well if you want. And then I want to do a second cost, which is for installation. So I'll click new cost again, and then I could call it 8-inch installation cost. And then I would change my cost type to installation, and then you put your value there. And so this is what you would do to go through and define these costs for 8-inch, and then maybe 20-inch, etc. As you can see, that's a bit tedious. I mean, it's really easy, but it would take you a little bit of effort to go through and do schedule 20 for 8-inch, and then my next size would be 14-inch, so I'd have to go to 14 and then pick schedule 20 and then do my costs. So that's how you used to have to do it before. In Fathom 10 and Arrow 7, we implemented a much, much easier way to do this. And so that's this area right here. So now what you can do is you can actually export a format from Fathom into Excel. That way you can define your cost information in Excel much, much easier, and then you could import it right back in here, and then your costs are all done. So it would be a lot easier to do that in a spreadsheet rather than going through the manual process here. So there's two ways that you can sort things. You can sort by material, nominal size, and then type, or you can sort by material, type, or schedule, and then nominal size. So those are two ways that you can sort in order to do your costs. I would recommend using the second option because it might be a little bit easier to do your cost information for all different sizes within a particular type. So if I choose this option right here, you'll see how things change. So if I click on my material dropdown, I now have everything arranged by the schedule themselves. So if I go down here and then do schedule 20, here's all my different sizes that are available for schedule 20. So this makes it a little bit easier to organize your piping information. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on schedule 20, and I'm going to export all of these sizes to an Excel file. So if I click export to Excel, this is the format that it's going to look like. So I've got my material name and then size and then type. So hopefully this gives you an idea of why it might look easier to do the sorting in this fashion for all your costs. So you just put your cost information here in your spreadsheet, and then you can import it back in. So once I have my format here, I'll click on export. And right now this is exporting to a spreadsheet. So this is going to be, I'll call this pipe material cost information. So you just give it a few seconds or two, and it's going to create an Excel spreadsheet with this structure here. And once it finishes exporting that data, it'll tell you when it's done. So now it's finished exporting all that data. So I can go to that folder on my computer, and I'm going to do this one right here, pipe material cost information. So that spreadsheet will open up here. All right. So here's my structure that I'm going to build my cost information for. Now, as you can see, if I open up my original cooling cost spreadsheet here and move this over to the side, I'm not doing costs for every single pipe size. There's a lot of them that are stripped out of here. So when you're doing cost calculations, the neat thing is that you do not have to have a cost for every single size in order to do your cost calculation. So I'm missing 22 inches here. So if I actually do have a 22-inch diameter pipe, I can still get a cost for that, because what Fathom will do is it's going to interpolate in this table in order to get costs for other sizes that are not explicitly listed in that list. So this keeps things a little bit more simplified for you. So what I'm going to do here is in my spreadsheet here, I'm going to remove some sizes. So I'm going to remove 10 and 12 inches in diameter. So I'll delete those rows, and then I'll delete the 16-inch diameter. I'm going to delete 22 inches in diameter. I'll delete 26 inches in diameter. And then we've got 28 and 30. And then I'm going to delete everything after 30 inches in diameter. Obviously, if you had larger diameter pipes, then you can do larger sizes, but I'm only going up to 30 inches in my model, so I can delete that. So now what I can do is simply copy this information here. So I'm going to copy it, and then if I paste it down here, I'll copy it again, and I'm just going to paste in the values. And then I'll do the same thing for my installation costs. So I've got my installation costs right here, so I'll copy that data, and then I'll paste it here, copy it, and then paste in the values. And then I'm going to delete that information and remove the borders because of my OCD. And you can keep maintenance here, but you don't have to actually put anything in those fields. So you can keep it blank just like it is. And now I'll save this pipe material cost information. I'm going to close that file. I'm going to move my costs over to my other monitor. And so now when I go back into Fathom, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import those costs from Excel. So here I would choose pipe material cost information, and I'm going to open it, and this will automatically import all those costs for me. And it makes it really super quick and easy. So we'll just give it a second here. Excellent. Cost data import is completed. So if I click on 8-inch, you can see that we've got material as well as I accidentally duplicated one of these costs, so I'm going to delete that. So I've got material. So I've got material and installation and my cost information there. If I went to my next size up, which is 14 inches in diameter, you can see that information. The next size from there was 18, and then we have 20, and then we have 24. Now, obviously, there's nothing for 22, so it's not going to create interpolation here. It'll just interpolate when it actually does the calculations. So all my cost information for my pipe material and installation is now defined. So I'm going to click on Save. And now if I click on Close, when I go back into my database, I can go to my cost database. And if I click on Open Available, I now have an available database. So it's pipe material and installation costs. And you can see that information that we created here. All right, so that's the first step, was to do the pipe material and installation costs. That's probably the most difficult step. But now that we have the ability where you can export a format from Fathom, easily update your information and import it back into Fathom, that makes doing the pipe material and installation costs so much easier. The last two steps is to do the fittings and losses costs and then the pump costs, and those are a lot easier. So here's how we're going to do that. Is I'm going to go in, and the next step is I want to create my cost database for all of my fittings. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to the database menu. Or actually, first, really quick, let me show you the database manager. So I go to the database manager, and I click on the expansion for pipe materials. Look at this. I've got my steel ANSI pipe material database. That's what was there before. This is my engineering database, and then this is my pipe cost database that I just created. So again, how I mentioned you can have multiple cost database with a single engineering database. If I had different vendors, I could do vendor 1, vendor 2, vendor 3, and I can associate all of those with a single engineering database. That way it can break down the costs for you for those different vendors. All right, so I'll click on Close. I'll go to Database, Cost Database, and now we're going to do the fittings and losses. So first step is to click on New, and second thing, just like I did before, I have to choose a engineering database that will be used for my cost database. So the engineering database that has all of the loss factor information for those fittings is going to be the AFT default internal database. So it's already built for you. You just have to select it and click select. So now I'm going to give it a name. We'll call it material and installation cost for fittings. And then I'll say this will be used for smooth flanged elbows with an R over D equal to 1 for 90-degree elbows. You could type in whatever notes you want. You could maybe put in vendor information, etc. So now I'll click on Save, and we'll give it a name. So this will be called elbow fitting costs. Yes, I want to make this database available and connected. So now I'm going to create my cost information. So if you went to pipe fittings and losses, similar to before where you would expand and drill down to the specific type that you want to use, you can do a new cost like this. But rather than doing it one by one, there's a much easier way. So I'm going to delete that cost. I'm going to delete that cost. And so instead of defining the cost information one by one, I'm going to do the tables option, because for the fittings and losses, it's a lot easier to create your cost information where your cost scales with the diameter of the piping. So I'm assuming that my elbow is similar to my pipe diameter, and this is how I'm going to scale my cost information for that. So I'll click on tables and then new table, and then we'll give this a name. So this will be called 90-degree elbow, if I can spell correctly. There we go. And then I'll call it material. You can do a table type in different ways: diameter, time, power, CV. So maybe your cost changes by CV if you want. I'm just going to do diameter. So this references the pipe diameter that the elbows would be using. And then I'll do cost. So now I'll click on this, and I have a cost data table up here. So I just go into my spreadsheet, and then I can copy and paste this data. So I copy it from my spreadsheet where I've got my cost information, and then go to edit table and paste. Boom, there it is. That's all there is to it. Super easy. I'm going to do another one for installation now. So I'll click on new table, and then I'm going to call this 90-degree elbow, and then installation, and I'll click on cost. And so I'll click OK, and now I have new information I have to put in. So here I will do my nominal size first. So I just do two separate paste steps because they're not side by side with each other in my spreadsheet. And there we go. So there's my installation cost. And after you go through and you set up these cost tables, there's one more thing that you need to do. And this is where you go back to the fittings and losses tab. So once you create your cost scale tables, is we go to the fittings and losses tab, and this is where you would drill down to your specific fitting. So I'm going to go elbow and then smooth flanged with an R/D of 1, 90 degrees. And I'll click on new cost, and this is where this makes it really easy. So I'll call this 90-degree elbow dash material, and then you can put in like schedule 28 through 34 inch. And then this is going to be a material. And here's the key thing, is because all of these fittings are lumped in to the specific pipe itself, there's a material size and type that is associated for that elbow. So these costs for my cost scale that I built here are going to apply to all sizes within that steel pipe material. And once I go down here to use the size table, I'm going to use table of costs, and then I scroll down just a little bit more, and I'm going to use my material scaling table. So it's just a few clicks of some drop-down menus. Next, I'm going to do another cost. So this will be 90-degree elbow dash installation, schedule 28 through 34. And then here, I need to make sure I change my cost type to installation. So this is installation, and then I'm going to use my table of costs for the size table. And then finally, on this drop down, I'll choose installation, and that's all there is to it. So after you go through and define these costs here for this particular elbow type, the cost will change as the pipe diameters change for your elbows. So I'll save this, and I'll close that. So now if I go back to my database manager, we can now see that for our internal default database, we have a cost database for the pipe fittings and losses. So now those are our two cost databases so far. We've got one more. That's our cost database for our pumps. So if I close this and I open up my pumps here, initially I'm just using random pump curve information. If I want to do a cost calculation for these pumps, then there needs to be a database. So I will eventually click on database list, but there's nothing to choose from because I've not connected that database yet. So if I go to database and then database manager, I would click on edit available list. I'm going to add an engineering database. So that's going to be the plantcooling.dat. So I just open it up. And if I open that, you've got my, I've got my plant cooling engineering database. If I select it here and then review the content, you can see that you've got some pump cost information in there. So that's the first step. So I'll click on close. Now that my plant cooling database is available, I can now create cost information for it. Give me one second. Okay, so I'll go to database and then cost database. And now I'm going to create my third cost database. Click on new. And now I'm going to use my plant cooling engineering database as my engineering database for my pumps. So I select it, click select, and give it a name, pump, material, and install costs. This comes from vendor A. Now, I'll click on save, and I'll create my cost database for my pumps. So we'll call this pump cost database. Yes, I want to connect it and add it. And now I go to my junction. So I could use tables if I want, where you could maybe scale your pump cost with power. But instead, I'm only doing one pump. So I've got my engineering database with this particular pump. If I click on show engineering data, this is the pump curve that is being used for my Circ Tower pump. Okay. So that's the engineering data. So if I select this guy and click on new cost, I'm going to call this pump material cost, and then it's going to be material, and that cost is, I believe, $28,500, which it is, so $28,500. This is going to be cost per item, not power. So this is per unit of pump, however many pumps I have. So if I click on new cost again, then this will be pump install cost. Change my cost type to installation, and then I'm going to put in $12,500 because that is my installation cost right here. And then I will click on save. That's all there is to it. So now when I click on close, I need to do two things. First, I need to set each of these pumps in my model to access the engineering database and then to include them in the cost database. So if I click on edit, global junction edit, and then pumps, I can select all these pumps, and this is where I'm going to associate them with the database. So I click on database list, and I'm going to use the engineering database for my pump information. So here's my pump information, and then if I click on cost, I'm going to include these in my cost. So when you click on include cost and report, you can calculate the costs for your pumps. And then we'll click OK. So there's only two changes I'm going to make. One change is going to be to use, let's see, I'm looking for my database. So I'm going to include in the cost report. And I'm not seeing something that I should see. I might need to go through and do this one by one. So I'll do database list, And there we go. So something was finicky about the global editing here. For some reason, when I did my global edit, it was not allowing me to set the database list for all 4 pumps. I'm not sure why it was not doing that. We'll get that fixed in the next maintenance release. Okay, so my pumps are all set up for the cost calculations, and I should be ready to go. And all right, so now I'm going to go to the output control window, and I'm going to set my parameters to default Fathom units, and I'm all ready to go. So I'm going to save my model, and I'm going to click on the green arrow to run the model. So it does all the regular hydraulic calculations for pressure and flow and everything. And if I click on my output, I now have this warning is not critical. I'm doing heat transfer, and it's just telling me that my density is changing. Not a big deal there because Fathom will still do the correct calculations. But what we care about is the cost report. So I go to the cost report. You can see very, very nicely the cost of your entire system. So my entire system in 10 years is going to cost me $5 million. So it breaks everything down for your pipe material costs. And then we have it's got all of our piping costs, the pump costs, and then it also has all of the costs for the fittings. And as you can see here, we have the different categories. Here's my material cost information for everything for each individual unit. The installation cost, again, dollars per unit. So however long that pipe is, that's how much it's going to cost. This is my non-recurring subtotal. I don't have any maintenance costs, so that's why this is all zero. And then I have my operational and energy costs. Now, obviously, operation and energy costs means nothing for pipes or fittings. That's a pump thing. So the majority of my costs here are energy costs. So if you can look here, my non-recurring subtotal is $2 million for my pipes, pumps, and fittings. So we got $2 million there. And then we have $3 million for energy costs. So as you can see, it costs each pump $751,000 to run the pumps over 10 years. So $3 million over 10 years. That's how we get our total of $5 million. And that's all there is to it. So as you can see here in this short webinar where I did a lot of rambling, I was able to easily calculate all of the entire system costs. Now, I know that a lot of you probably find that it may be very difficult to get your cost information, and you may have to get your your cost estimators, a whole bunch of data. It's really, really simplified. All you need for the cost calculation example in Fathom is simply your material and installation costs and your energy costs, and all you need is to get those costs as a function of diameter, really. All you need is this basic information, and once you can get this information, you can calculate all of your system costs. Now, this is going to lead into my next webinar, or our next webinars in the next couple of weeks. It's one thing to just calculate what your costs are, and there it is. But we are engineers, and we want to be good stewards of society and the world and the environment. So it's important to not just know what your costs are, but to be a good engineer, it's a really good effort to try and figure out ways to minimize these costs. So here's my system where I have all my pipe diameters listed out here. What the new automated network sizing module will do very soon is it will have the ability to change the combination of pipe sizes throughout your system. And by using different combinations of pipe sizes, that can be used to take this cost that we calculated of your, maybe this is your previous system design. So once you get your previous system design now to work with your new requirements, it's $5 million. Okay, can we bring that down to maybe $3 million by changing the size combination in different ways? And the answer is you can, and the amount of savings that you can get is significant. So stay tuned for our next webinars and register for those, and that's where you can learn about how you'll do that with the ANS module. So if you go to Learning Center and then webinars on our website, for the upcoming webinars, this is where you can register for your automated pipe sizing calculations and then the ANS calculations of more of a complicated piping network. So register for those webinars and you'll be able to see how to use that powerful capability. Thank you all very much for your time today. And if anyone has questions regarding sales or information, you can contact us at sales@aft.com. If you have tech support related questions, you can contact us through our support center and we'll be able to get an answer to you. So thank you very much for your time. Enjoy calculating your costs, and I will see you in the next webinar. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your week.